This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Hi listeners, this is Brent Sutton. Welcome to the 40th episode of the Practice of Learning Teams podcast show. On today's show, Glynis McCarthy and Brent Robinson join me as we talk with the one and only Jeffery Lyth. The title of today's podcast is Dumb, Dangerous, Difficult and Different. We explore everyday learning, understanding weak and strong signals, using learning teams to get better understanding, and using a worker-led method called the 4Ds of dumb, dangerous, difficult and different. Jeff is doing some amazing work in this space, and we are proud to be able to take part in extending learning and improving in everyday work. Please sit back and enjoy as we explore everyday learning with Jeffery Lyth. Welcome listeners, today is a fantastic episode because it's the first time that we've got the three authors of the Practice of Learning Teams together. So Brent Robinson is in Auckland. He came across from Australia.
Fully vaccinated,
which is fantastic. COVID test, that's right. We don't let anyone on the border without a COVID test. And I've got Glynis here and myself, and we are joined today by Canada's favourite son of the new view of safety, Mr. Jeffery Lyth. How are you, Jeff?
Hello, friend. Fully vaccinated son of safety. I'll have you know.
Well, we will open the door for you as well.
Come on down.
I can't wait to come back.
Look, we're super excited, and I'll continue to be optimistic that maybe it's something that we can achieve in 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should strive to that in 2022. The way we're headed now, I think that's reasonable, and that gives us lots of good time to plan the festivities.
Yeah, and look, I'm keen to do a road show. I just imagine we could hire this massive oversized RV. We bring Todd down. We can do some whitewater rafting. We'll have a bluegrass band on board.
Fish tacos.
And fish tacos. How does that sound?
Sounds pretty good.
Goodness.
Sounds like a taco.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Throw in some of that great New Zealand wine and we're off and running.
Oh, no shortage of that. The reason I wanted to get together is that, as you know, we've been quite active lately in sort of pushing the boundaries around everyday learning and trying to operationalize everyday learning as well. And we were super excited about the feedback and the number of downloads of our everyday learning doco that was produced. And I can't help but feel that more and more organizations are wanting to have that conversation about how can they learn from every day. Recently, I pulled together a little diagram of the classic iceberg diagram, where we talk about what we see above the sea line versus what we see below. And I was really conscious that a lot of activities that we do around things like audits and observations and worker engagements and all these wonderful things, that very few of those things actually look to understand the size of the iceberg or the mass of the iceberg. They're really trying to chip away at the iceberg. What have been your thoughts around that?
Oh, I follow. I think that's a fine way of putting it. Personally, I'm a little bit reluctant around iceberg models just because there's been a number of them and they work. I mean, they work quite well to describe this. But I don't know. There's something about pyramids or icebergs that are a bit concerning. But what you're saying, I completely agree with. I think that this work we've done lately, where we are now, one way I've been thinking about it recently is that we've done a lot of work over the last few years to push back the threshold where organizations begin that blame, shame, retrain, or any other form of retribution. They've used it quite liberally. And if we get them to reserve that and push that back, it creates a real opening to learn. It's almost like what else? It's like retracting the cover on an in-ground pool and revealing the water below. And I think that, as you were saying that about an iceberg, I like to think about, sending back that blame and retribution to open up these new opportunities or previously hidden opportunities to see context. What about a glass bottom boat? What if it's metaphorically, when the hull of your boat is opaque, you just wonder what's down there, or you assume nothing is there, or whatever is down there is of no interest. But as soon as you have a glass bottom boat and you get an idea of what's down there all the time, I think that's really the incredible thing. I don't know, might be a goofy metaphor, but I think we're all saying the same thing, is that when we open up a greener pasture of learning in our own organizations, we create that opportunity by using less blame and retribution and more avenues to inquire and appreciate everyday work.
If we think about Eric Honagel's diagram, everyday learning is really that big mass, that circle, that concentric circle that he shows. And you've got the accidents and incidents, got the everyday component. And I sort of think about, how do we create that visibility? How do we allow organizations to see that? Because, everything above the waterline is very much led by the organization. And what's been puzzling me is that if we want to see what's below that waterline, if we want to look through that opaque hole and look underneath, then, is it something that should really be focused about being worker-led and organizationally supported? Interesting. Well, and I know it. I love our conversations, guys. Let me just, you can edit this out, but I just want to say how much I love our conversations. The expression that came to mind is an expression I've heard my entire career, and that is compliance is the minimum standard. And, other things I've read lately that have said that it's not a regulatory requirement to make inquiry of our organizations in different ways. So there's a couple of things here. We've got a lot of local companies that have taken that quite literally, compliance is the standard numerically. But I think conceptually, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about it's far beyond compliance and enforcement to really develop an appreciation for the richness of the context in our work and go and look at that. So it's definitely the new horizon. It's definitely a new necessity. The future is now. I heard somebody say the other day, and I thought that feels very true as we are starting to travel a bit more and move into spring here in North America. And it feels like we're living in the future, and it's no longer an anticipation. It's a time of doing it, and we're doing it, and we're showing the results. It's just a very exciting time. The thing that we're trying to focus on at the moment is how to operationalize these things. And, I think the first part of it, Jeff, is how do we feed this information to people in a way that's digestible? And, so at the moment, there's a lot of noise in the market. And, we can take all that noise, we can chuck it into a blender, and we could either blend it into baby food, or maybe we can blend it into a nice little consommé.
A mousse.
It's got to be
whip it into a mousse.
I think the issue is it's got to be consumable, doesn't it? At the moment, we've got these really, stunning ideas that come from up on high, and what we've got to be able to do is help organizations turn it into something that's valuable and consume it and use it and make it part of their daily we're going to use this keep using this nutrition type process or discussion. It helps provide the nutrition to the organization, and I think that's what we've got to help do. And when you're up on high, it's hard to tell the difference between whether it's baby food or as a smoothie as my kids like to eat, or it's a gourmet 5-star soup. It's all got the same ingredients in it. We've just got to help people digest it.
And I think there's a kind of an extension on from that. I think it's also about how do we embed something that is sustainable. So it actually becomes the, business as usual rather than this thing that is, seen as a bit of a fad or seen as something that you're kind of trying new, that this is, kind of new territory. Actually, what we want to be able to do is embed it so that it just becomes part of practice.
It feels as though in the last few years, I think we've had a lot more success opening up, making the first steps in opening up organizations to learning. And we've been pretty successful coming in and, and giving them a first taste of learning and what that can be. But for them to take next step, I think the information starts coming fast, and it's a lot to handle. And so these, ideas and methods and means of once we've unleashed all that information, once we've cracked the piñata open and is right everywhere, how do we process it? How do we handle it? And that. And so I think that these tools, or these ways of doing that, I think are really necessary at this point to answer the next need.
I like to think of it like frequency, that, you've got this wave of peaks and troughs coming through, and it's hard to discern those over a long period of time, but you can pick them out. You're going to see some signals that are reoccurring. It's the same pattern, and if you have a mechanism that lets you separate that out from the stream of noise coming through, that's going to be quite a powerful way of looking at stuff. I think that's where we've got to get to, but it has to be relatively simple as well.
Yeah, 100%.
So one of the things, Jeff, when we run learning teams, there's never a shortage of learning.
No.
And the more learning teams you run, the more learnings that can be gained. And I'm sort of wondering, there is, time, effort, and resource needed to run a learning team, and the value of them and the feedback is amazing. And what we've been thinking about is how do we turn learning teams into more of a targeted opportunity? So how do we look at something so that we can get workers to sort of share with us that narrative that we can then try and make sense of that data, and then use a learning team to really get in there and understand it at a much deeper level. So how can we get things that are worker led, where they can give us that key intelligence, that stuff that we love, and then we can then use a learning team very much as that sort of that whole curious component and digging and getting a deeper meaning and understanding.
We've talked a lot about the resource required for learning, for the resources expended on investigations versus the resource expended on learning teams, and the difference in yield. So I think that the time and expense and effort that goes into a learning team is really nothing compared to the perceived hurdle of how the organization is going to handle all of those findings, all of that learning. And so to Brent's point, what is the? I'm still searching for a metaphor. I'm thinking. You know what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking when I got to tour the mine just down south of New Zealand, still there, and they talked about pulling the raw material, mining up the raw material, and putting it through a process and to refine it down, if you will, to what they were looking for, and different percentages of different concrete. So it's really that processing. It's starting with a lot of raw information and having an efficient system to process it and refine it to those key parts. Learning teams, obviously, on top of everyday learning teams are a huge part of being able to do it. But from an organizational perspective, learning, there's so much to learn that the learning effort, not so much the learning effort itself, but the management of the learning, just huge effort. So how do we assist them? How do these tools and methods help them pour through so much data.
I think that's the bit that we're seeing, and the example I've seen recently is that we were working with a team and the word resource came up. And so on the day, resource was really important, but over a week it was lost again because, you know, they're having that pre-start or that everyday learning team meeting, and resource was the word that came up. Over a week it disappears again, and then it pops up again. And so what you need is a way of viewing that to say, well, you know, this month resource came up 8 times out of 22 working days. So it's really important. And that's the bit that we need to make sense of, because obviously the people at the front, on the front line, resource is one of the issues that's giving them, it comes up on these meetings. And that's where I think that the strength of these things comes from. You don't have to learn about every individual meeting or every individual learning team event when it's everyday learning. What you need to do is be able to pick out the important nuggets that are within those and then say, okay, let's go and have a look at this. And that's where I think Brent gets to when he talks about having a learning team on that particular result. So for the next month, we're going to say, okay, well, this resource issue that keeps popping up, the signal that we're getting that's periodic, but it's not the same time frame. It's different days, might be a week apart, and it gets lost in the noise of the organization. When we can pull that out and then look at that becomes a really powerful way of taking that everyday information and doing something positive with it. And that's where I see the strength of this stuff. That's what people are looking for. The people that I'm talking to, at least.
So it is about distilling something, isn't it? It's about taking the volume of information that's coming forward and distilling it so you can see where the trends are.
Yeah.
And then from there, you take those trends, pop it back through a learning team, and really start to explore it.
Yeah, but link it. I think the two things here is linking that frequency of use, or that of that how it's appearing, but combining it with the sentiment of the narrative that workers are sharing with us, because that sentiment is telling us whether they are coping within their own means or they're struggling.
Well, it gives you a sense of importance, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that sentiment tells you the kind of the feelings and the actions that are often attached to something because of how much it has been spoken about, or the veracity in which it's been spoken about.
Which I would say, Jeff, is a bit of an indicator about that resilience component of how the humans are performing within the system.
Yeah. This detection, I think it's wonderful what you guys have done to add to this knowledge capture, but knowledge processing or distillation.
Understanding the frequency of words or the frequency of signals, and then the sentiment of that signal, the narrative that sits behind it, the meaning. Right. Almost
three-dimensionalizing the capture, it feels like, the learning. I'm reminded of those radio bursts, those detected radio bursts, and is it a lot of information compressed? Is each one at just a tiny portion of information? So yeah, this new means of really being sensitive to context and monitoring all of the rich nuance in the context of the work, and being able to look at that over time, looking at it from different perspectives, finding all those linkages. It's just, how happy are you? Let me change subject and flip it back. How happy are you guys every day now? How exciting is this? That not only have we kind of found ways to open up that hatch door in our floor, our asymptotic floor, and look down there. And we know there's a lot of mining and then distillation that has to be done with the information, that's been below our floorboards. How great is it? How great is it to be playing in this new amazing sandbox?
It's fantastic. From an organization's point of view, and to use one of Brent's metaphors, for the first time, we're actually looking out the front window. of the car moving down the
Yeah.
freeway, because a lot of the stuff we've been doing in the past is looking backwards through the rear vision mirror, saying, oh, based on the things that have happened in the past, we should be okay in the future. Not true. This is, I'm super excited by this. It makes so much sense to me. It's an exciting time.
That's a brilliant metaphor, because
That's
that
Brent's
would then say that
climate.
what we're talking about now that we're looking through the windshield, finally, is things like depth perception and, judging time motion. I mean, metaphorically, that's sort of our view. How about you, Glynis?
Yeah, look, I think the potential is really there, isn't it? I was just thinking as we were talking, just the power it gives to a practitioner. Again, I think that, when you're looking at trying to manage risk, if you're always looking backwards, it's very difficult to project what's going forward. And I think what we're talking about here is an ability to really understand what impacts on how work is being done. If we understand how work is really being done, then actually we can have much more robust conversations and possibly more accurate conversations about how risk is really being managed in that context. So I think it gives people such an incredible amount of insight. I think it gives people an opportunity to be much more, I suppose, the ability to really have an understanding of how work is being done.
And I don't think we should be scared about metrics. I mean, we've been thinking about this quite a bit, Jeff. And, organisations want activity measurements. You are measured, your income is measured by the hours that you work. You measure how many hours you sleep at night. We shouldn't be scared of measuring activities. I think the thing that we're trying to really understand is how do we link that metric, that activity component, with that whole sort of qualitative narrative. So it's great to say that we've undertaken, 25 pre-starts for the month. Okay, that by itself doesn't really tell us much. It just says that we've got a series of activities. But of those 25 activities, here are the 6 key themes that have come through. This is our measure of the resilience that those workers faced across those 25 things. And here is what the looting team found when the organisation became curious and engaged those workers to get a deeper and better understanding.
I think that's a really good point, because you're not letting go of something you're already doing. You're actually using it to learn something and to delve into it with more depth. And I think that's so important as we move forward. Instead of saying, our LTIRs are 50% of what they were in whatever year, it's not a useful measure. What is a useful measure is taking a particular data point and then expanding on it. And I think that's a really powerful outcome.
And aren't we trying to strive towards the presence of something?
Yes.
And aren't we just putting a context around that presence of something?
Rather than its absence.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, was that mind-blowing, Jeff?
I'm just thinking about predictive indicators, and that, we're talking about the move from lag to the move to this sensitivity around what's really going on in operations. And I love this bit of the conversation. But I like that we're stopping short of making any claims to leaking in the predictive sense. I have said we've had this conversation before that, time will tell. Time will tell. But I don't know, the present work is critical in that refinement or that distillation. If we're going to have any hope in the coming years to really bring in something that's a predictive for success or just operational performance success, this that we're entering into now in earnest, critical to getting there, but we couldn't get directly there from where we were.
Yeah, look, I suppose I've been thinking, just lately, not only, should we be asking, better questions for better outcomes, we should also be asking different questions for different outcomes. And we shouldn't be scared of trying things differently.
No, safe, adaptive.
I mean, at the end of the day, we're getting people to share narrative.
Yeah, it's
not asking people to put tools down or to change tools out. We're getting them to share narrative.
We're also asking people to critically reflect. We're asking them to appraise what they do in practice, and it's being generated at a worker level. I can only see benefit coming from that.
Yeah, Glynis, your topic of reflection has come up. I think of you every time, actually. It comes up recently, and we talk whether it's, soak time or whether that's professional reflection or facilitator reflection. It's so valuable. That word is creeping in more and more.
Yes, and look, it's so valuable that we're not far away from releasing our first Learning Teams Facilitator Journal, the Journal of Reflection, as we may call it. Who knows? And
how soon should I start checking my mailbox?
Well, look, very shortly, Jeff will be seeking for both you and Todd to make some contribution with some insightful words of wisdom.
Oh.
Out of the process, Jeff.
I don't know.
I mean, I've created a little 1 minute mindful minute for the journal, so that people can sort of become more present and center themselves whilst they reflect. So we're doing all sorts of guru type things, and I could just imagine you with a nice caftan and a scented candle, and just sharing your wisdom with us. I've been super excited about our recent conversations about the 4Ds.
Yeah.
And about look, I got to tell you, that's been so fascinating. And I shared a little bit of insight with a group the other day, and they sat there and they just looked. They said, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
They said that makes just so much sense.
So go through the 4Ds again.
Maybe Jeff can.
Oh. Well, now, given how much fun this conversation is, I want to make up 4 sassy D words, but the ones we're sticking with are dumb, dangerous, difficult, or different. And unfortunate in some workplace sensitivity. It's not a terrific word, but we're looking at how people make sense, and I've gotten a lot of mileage on that when discussing with operational leaders how the common sense that they used to rely on is pretty much dissipated. I think I was saying the other day, I think common sense started dissipating from society in the 80s. Some hair or the colors I wore in the 80s say, does that make sense?
Yes.
But we do want to inquire about sense making. So dumb, dangerous, obviously risk, difficult, just operational difficulty, hardship, and different, an inquiry about change. And so Ivan Tuplady, West Forest Service, has been speaking 3Ds now for quite a while when they were heading into risky operations. And for our kind of industrial operations, we added difficulty as a sort of a metric of operational challenge. But they're terrific. I don't know that it's that particular set of questions in detail or what each of them will unpack, although each of them has unpacked, shown us a lot of stuff. I think that taken as a whole, that level of curiosity as kind of in those four points, it's just the kind of conversation we want to initiate. I think they're excellent at portraying how low a threshold operational leaders want when it comes to what they hear about and what's interesting to them. They're powerful, simple, powerful, and really the devil's in the details. So some nuts of gold come up through that process, but But even if the 4D inquiry process doesn't yield any golden nuggets, it's great exchange. It's really appropriate, beneficial type of exchange and engagement and curiosity in operations.
Look, I'm 100% with you. I mean, it's really interesting. When I first heard it, the dumb word didn't sit with me particularly well, and I know it didn't sit with Glynis. But what we're saying is we're looking at this through the lens of the worker, not looking at the worker. So it's looking through their lens. And the dumb is about, they're not able to make sense of something. It just doesn't make sense to them. Therefore, it is dumb to them. Not that the worker is dumb. It's just dumb to them.
Yeah.
And I think,
yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect because ultimately, if we can provide people with a framework that they can, think about them within those 4 segments, it starts a conversation.
Yeah. And I did some stuff a couple of weeks ago when we ran it through a installation crew on a construction site, and the guys really liked it because the way they used dumb was they had a particular methodology that they were given, and the guy doing the work said, "This is dumb. This isn't going to work," right? And he goes, "It's a really good way of talking about it." That initiates the conversation. Say, "Hey, this is dumb, and it's made it difficult. Let's go back and review this and come up with a better way of doing it." And it's such a powerful, easy way to do it. The organization has to then be able to say, "Oh, we've got a dumb signal. Let's go do something with it." We follow that back up again. But typically the guys at the front line are going, "Okay, we're going to rewrite this particular safe work method statement and then and modify it." And to Brent's point and to your point, Jeff, it started the conversation. Great conversation. They just didn't keep what they had. They actually modified it, which is what all the organizations I talk to want. They're happy for them to be modified. They learned something from it, and they got an improvement from their site crews. So there's an operational effectiveness that came out of it as well, which is super powerful. And I think that's the bit we miss. It's not just about safety.
I wanted to make a comment about the 4Ds. I worked with a group the other day that were very diverse. And what I would say for, when people have English as a second language where there's literacy issues, health and safety is very exclusive. We're asking workers all of the time to, identify hazards, to assess risk. And actually, you're asking them to do something that's really conceptual. And when you start to use those 4Ds or whatever that language is that belongs to those workers in the context where they work, suddenly health and safety becomes much more inclusive. And actually, that's what I think this is really what this conversation is about.
Yeah.
It is about how do we get inclusivity for workers where work is being done? How do we actually get inclusivity for the organization? How do they make some sense of that? And so how do you get that partnership between the two?
Yeah, amazing. That too has been a topic of conversation. That diversity is something that can be achieved. A diverse workforce can be achieved just through hiring practices, but to really be inclusive of that workforce, I think that this thing we're talking about really helps us go there by making it informal. And I might say that we've known about weak signals almost as long as the safe culture term has been thrown around, that after major incidents they retrospectively went back and found weak signals, and sometimes they're still spoken of that way. But in the years since then, us going out in foresight, us going out looking ahead and really being sensitive to these things, I think that that to me is what these questions yield for us, is just little whispers, just little thoughts, weak signals. Our ability to then refine them, distill them is really critical. But I think that this safety science or academic work, it need not be, the pursuit of weak signals need not be incredibly complex and difficult. It could be as simple as feeding a baby, really. I mean, these questions we're asking are very simple. And I got to say, if what we're learning from the 4D is baby food, then as a father of a grandfather of 4 young grandchildren, baby food is highly nutritious.
Yeah.
And it helps them grow up strong. And I just think that where there is a simple and effective means to out in the field with people who work, if there's a simple, effective way to learn these things we know we need to learn, there's absolutely no need for those people or even the practitioners to know the lineage ideas around weak signals and where they came from or all that. Like, just those origins are not important. What's important is that frontline leaders can engage effectively with their people about real context, and that the organization has a means to process it. And I think we're there.
100%, because ultimately we're trying to, the projects that we're trying to focus on, and I'm super excited with some of the stuff that's going on, is about how to provide a way of capturing those weak signals across multiple means and methods, but turn that, put them through the equalizer or whatever other metaphor for music we're going to apply today, and then turn those into strong signals.
Yep.
And from those strong signals come learnings, and learning teams is the mechanism to make sense of the strong signals.
Yeah, I like that metaphor too. A song played incredibly slowly that has to be sped up to be made sense of, or a song played incredibly quickly that just sounds like a blast, and it needs to be slowed down and drawn out to be made sense of, to become apparent. So I think that this handling of information that we're talking about, handling of this rich contextual data, that's the new sort of exciting part of the journey.
That's right, that narrative.
Guys, this is great fun. We should chat more often.
Thank you, listeners, for being part of this podcast. We would love to hear your learnings or other topics you would like us to explore about learning teams. Go to www.podcastlearnings.com and give us your feedback. Become part of the community of practice with learning teams. Go to www.learningteamscommunity.com. Support the authors of the practice of learning teams. Purchase the book from Amazon.com or go to www.learningteamsbook.com for an inside look and other free book resources from the authors.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.